and prove the Adventist church wrong and how I couldn't fight against it. It was like strong walls that I couldn't conquer. And I said I couldn't beat it, so I decided to join them. I was out in the field today with team number 1, and we call her Mama Melody now. She's there to make sure that we have our water. She's there to make sure we have our books, that we need to use the bathroom, that we've taken lunch, and even if you need a hug after a hard door. Mama Melody did a great job, and so I was out in the field for about half a day, but it seemed like every single step I took, my phone was bzz, 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 phone calls, texts. It's a Monday, and I wear other hats within the ministry, and so it was hard to focus going door to door within the field. I had so many work priorities, so I decided to call an Uber and tell Mama Nora in the building? Oh, Mama Nora. To tell Mama Melody that I'm going to have to, unfortunately, take the afternoon off to go and deal with some matters. And so I called an Uber, and the Uber arrived, and Mama Melody gave me my charger. And she gives him a book, right? And she says, hey, this is what it is. Gave her a little spiel. And she says, but if you want to know all about it, he's the man to ask. So I'm already sitting in the back seat with him, right? And I'm like, all right, here we go. She made it easy. And I kid you not, as soon as we started turning around, he just trauma dumps on me. That's kind of an interesting term. I never really heard of that term before, but he just goes on and explains his whole life story. Like, I asked him, I said, hey, man, you do Uber full time? And he just went on this long story about, how he went to college and he got a degree and he graduated college. And ever since he's graduated, he's been looking to get a job, but he can't get a job. He's put in over 500 applications. And here he is driving Uber, right? And he's so sad, And, I'm just sitting there trying to practice compassionate listening. And it was interesting, this grown man telling me all of his woes and all of his story. And I ended up asking him, I said, well, do you practice any particular faith that helps you kind of get through all this, after sympathizing with him a little bit? And he says, well, yeah, I just started going to this church in Decatur. And I was like, oh, okay. What's the name? And, if you ask that, oftentimes they're like, oh, I don't know. He didn't know, but he pulled it up on his phone because his friend had been inviting him. And he says, oh, okay, it's the St. Peter's Catholic Church. I said, oh, okay. He said, yeah, have you heard of them before? And I said, well, no, I'm kind of new in the area, but there's a lot of Catholic churches named after St. Peter, of course. And I said, how long have you been going there? He said, well, about 2 months. My friend invited me. Okay. Do you like it? He said, yes. I was very surprised at that. So he started enjoying that, and he didn't ask me the question back. So I just said, well, I'm religious as well. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. He goes, oh, okay. I said, yeah, have you ever heard of us? No. I said, yeah, we're Christian, The only thing one of the main differences that stands us apart from someone else is that we keep we go to church on Saturday. And he goes, wait, why? Isn't Sunday the Sabbath? And I said, well, you would think so, right? Yeah. And I said, I thought so too. Everyone goes to church on Sunday, right? Yeah. And so we went into this whole discussion about I shared my testimony about how I studied into all different denominations, and I tried to fight against the Adventist church and prove the Adventist church wrong, and how I couldn't fight against it. It was like strong walls that I couldn't conquer. And I said I couldn't beat it, so I decided to join them. And we were going back and forth, and you could just tell his mind was just blown. He's just like, wow, I've never seen it that way before. And he goes, and so does the book talk about all that too? And I said, oh yeah, absolutely. And I said, it goes even deeper. It talks about the history, knowing that he's going to the Catholic Church, he'll find that very fascinating. It talks about the history behind the change and all this and that. And then I just felt that he was just so open that I was like, well, let me go a little bit more and hit him with the special weapon. I call it the special weapon of Adventism, the truth about hell, right? because, Catholic, they believe in, purgatory, and then, the eternal, everyone else believes in eternal hellfire and all these things. And so I just started explaining the truth about hell, and it just blew him out of the water. Wow, that makes so much sense. How God can be loving and still be just. And we talked about how, yeah, you can't go to one extreme to believe that God is so good that he lets everyone go into heaven, because if they do, it'll be eternal torment for them because they hate God. And he's like, man, that makes so much sense. And I was like, yeah, so the most merciful thing God can do, instead of allowing people to live forever with him in heaven who hate him and allowing them to burn in hell for all eternity, the most merciful thing he could do is let them to cease to exist, so they don't hurt themselves or anyone else, or nor are they tortured in the presence of God for the rest of eternity. And it just clicked. And I said, yep, chapter 33 talks all about that, man. And anyway, it was just powerful. We prayed together, and I was feeling pretty heavy because, I left the team in the front lines because I needed to handle some matters. And I was having all these doubts, but God lined that divine appointment up, and it taught me, hey, he's leading in the other areas of responsibility that I need to make sure that I take care of. And at the same time, he affirmed that through that divine appointment. So God is good.